Now that we have learned about non-cooperation movement, about civil disobedience movement, in this part of the chapter, finally, we will be ending this by talking and discussing about the outcomes of these nationalistic movements. So, what impact these movements came, what kind of national feeling it harbored, and where were these national feelings being manifested into? If in literature, then how? If in folklore, then how? We will be discussing all these outcomes in this part of the chapter. The sense of collective belonging, nationalism by and by the by the thread of all these movements, the idea, the concept of nationalism, that concept, that consciousness basically of one, of belonging to one nation. All right, so national consciousness that shooted up, okay, and the belief, or you can say the idea of that belief, that all of us, we belong to one nation, to one collective group, that that was harboring among people, that started to be being witnessed among one and all. So this sense of collective belonging came partly through the experience of united struggles, because being a part of all these movements, even though they were of different sections, but ultimately their goal was what? Ultimately their goal was to be under one independent united nation. So whatever struggle that every people of every section of the society they went through, it was for one particular cause. So that gave a united struggle, that gave a united motive to all these people. And cultural processes like history, fiction, folklore, songs, popular prints and symbols, literature, they played their role to stir up this feeling of national consciousness among everybody. Okay, so here we'll be learning about that. Personification of motherland. India was not to be seen as Bharat Mata from day one, right? There was a time, there was an event that ultimately led to the personification of our nation, and the personification that India, our nation, would be known as Bharat Mata. All right. So identity of the nation is most often symbolized in a figure or image, and this feminine figure, this maternal figure, okay, this helped create an image that people, all of the people struggling in different societies, they can identify with the nation as being children of this great motherland. Okay, so since all of them wanted to come under one faction, all right, so this concept, this abstract symbolical notion that all of us, we are children of our land, and since we are children, so our land is our mother, and our mother means our Bharat Mata. So it was in the 20th century, with the growth of nationalism and with the rising uprising of all these movements, that finally the identification of India, it came to be visually associated, you can see in this picture, with the identification of a Bharat Mata. Okay, the image of Bharat Mata was first created by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. His famous novel his famous novel Anand Mat. It was in this novel, if you happen to read this novel, here you will constantly be seeing that the author is debating, or the author is trying to arouse the feeling of nationalism in the protagonist of the novel, which happens to be a woman. Okay, and that feeling of nationalism is being associated with the feminine godly attributes of that woman. All right. So, and in 1870s, he wrote Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. He wrote Vande Mataram as a hymn to the motherland, and later he included that hymn in his novel that was widely sung during the Swadeshi movement in Bengal. Okay, so this idea of being very strongly, very devotedly associated with a mother figure, that played a very as as a catalyst. All right, it played as a role of a catalyst in order to stir up the feelings of being associated with one nation amongst all the people in all the different sections of the society. So moved by this movement, Swadeshi movement, Rabindranath Tagore painted his famous image of Bharat Mata. Rabindranath Tagore, you must have heard of him, and devotion to this mother figure came to be seen as the evidence of one's nationalism. So, one and all of them, they came and united themselves, and they came and identified with this figure, of this feminine figure, of this godly figure. So, it's not just a figure of a mother, but it's also a figure of a goddess. Okay, so it's a mother goddess, you can say. It's a Bharat Mata. Okay, and everyone, they came to be identifying themselves with this image of mother goddess, and they harbored feelings of devotion, and they harbored feelings of feelings of duty, feelings of responsibility towards one's nation. All right, so this motherland was personified and projected as a god, and it was represented in various paintings and drawings. Okay, patriotic paintings, especially of Jawaharlal Nehru. Here he is shown, carrying an image, holding an image of Bharat Mata, and also the map of India close to his heart. So paintings such as these, they helped in arousing the feelings of nationalism amongst Indians, because they could see that, oh, our national leaders are the people who represent us, or the people who will represent us, the people who will get us liberated from this British imperial force. They are holding this personified figure of our nation, and they are also holding this map of India. Means they are basically this is a symbolification. This is a symbol, okay, a symbolization that these people, they are going to protect our motherland. They're going to, and by protecting our motherland, they are going to protect our rights. They are going to protect our identities, and so on and so forth. So in a lot of popular prints, these nationalist leaders, the figure of these national leaders, and associating their figures with the figure of Bharat Mata, it created a very positive feeling of nationalism. Okay. Then, to talk about Indian folklore, when the feelings of nationalism was mixed up with literature, then it helped in the revival of the Indian folklore. So nationalists, they began recording folk tales. So whatever tales were used to be earlier sung or written by bards, they started capturing those folk songs, legends, all right, and they used these tales. We use these localized tales as an opposition to the kind of folklores that were being propagated by the Britishers. So that helped in damaging the cultures of British, okay, and in reviving our own Indian culture. All right, especially in Bengal, with the help of Rabindranath Tagore, he collected a lot of nursery rhymes, and you must be knowing his poems, his books. All right, his writings are so very still very prominent, not just in Bengal but in the whole of India. All right, and it's very essential to preserve this folk tradition in order to discover one's national identity and restore a sense of pride in one's past. So if you remember the discussion that we had in the previous chapter, chapter 1 of history, the rise of nationalism in Europe, there I talked about that the feelings of being united with a lot of people through a sharing of a culture, through a sharing of a history, or even say sharing of folklore, literature. Okay, this sharing of all these cultural attributes, this is an indication that all those people, they are identifying themselves. They are identifying themselves as one whole against the autonomous British power. All right. So, in Madras, Natesa Sastry published a massive 4-volume collection of Tamil folk tales, the folklore of southern India. So, this revival of folklore was not just happening in the northern India, it was happening in the eastern India, it was happening in the western India, it was happening in the southern India. So, every place was coming up with their own version of their own localized folk tales that was basically tackling against posing a very, you can say, a very right contestant, okay, against the cultures of the west. Okay, so yes, this Natesri Sastry believed that folklore was national literature, and it was the most trustworthy manifestation of people's thoughts and characteristics. Okay, during the Swadeshi movement in Bengal, a tricolor flag, red, green, yellow, was designed, the first tricolor flag, and by 1921 Gandhiji had designed the Swaraj flag. So now, with the revival, with the enthusiasm of all these people, via the publication or the distribution of Indian tales against the British tales, or Indian culture against the British culture, national leaders, they also started designing national flag with the hope that freedom is very, very near. Okay, and reinterpretation of history. Now, whatever history India had, it was started to getting reinterpreted, because with this reinterpretation, all of these people could had a say that all of us were, a part of our freedom struggle. That feeling of unification, okay, that feeling of shared identity, all right, is very important. Okay, when a people of a nation, they have one history, then they can say that yes, we are belonging to this one nation. We all have shared one history. We all have one identity, that is of an Indian. All right. So by the end of 19th century, many Indians began feeling that to instill a sense of pride in the nation, Indian history had to be thought about differently. Okay, and how they interpreted history differently, they interpreted history differently by delving deep again into the Indian art and architecture, science, mathematics, religion, culture, law, philosophy, crafts and trade. So not what the British were allowing the Indians to read, but rather delving deep into the Indian history. Okay, these nationalist histories these nationalist histories urge the leaders to take pride in India's great achievements in the past and struggle to change the miserable conditions of life under the British rule. So, the purpose of folklore, the purpose of reinterpreting history, all of these were just to revive that feeling of national consciousness. Okay, and how can this feeling of national consciousness be revived? This can be revived by instilling a sense of pride in everybody, a sense of pride, a sense of belonging, a sense of identity. All right, that all of us, we had a shared past, we have a, a culture that is different from the British culture. Okay. Now, all of this finally gave rise to the Quit India movement. There was a mission launched known as the Crips mission, which was basically for the purpose of securing the force of full Indian cooperation. Okay, for for you can say the victories of the British Army in the World War II. So basically, for their own purpose, the Britishers, they were recruiting Indians, and they were trying to establish a full Indian cooperation. All right, but that was fortunately failed, and that was to ensure that cooperation. This Crips mission was launched. All right, but that failed. All right, fortunately for us, it failed, and the effects of World War II, that saw that the superpower England, it finally was brought down to its heels. Okay, it created a widespread discontentment in India, and this led Mahatma Gandhi to launch a movement. So widespread discontentment means a political unrest, a political imbalance, that what will happen now. Okay, how will we gain independence now? All right, so this finally led Mahatma Gandhi. He took the reins, he took the charge, and after working with his team, a Congress team, he on 14th July 1942, the Congress Working Committee in Wardha, they passed the historic Quit India resolution demanding immediate transfer of power to the Indians. So he took advantage of the situation, and he finally said that we want to withdraw. We want to establish us Indians in the power of ruling this country, and we want you Britishers to go away. So this led to the famous speech, do or die. So either you quit, or you face the consequences. So it was on this occasion that Gandhiji delivered the famous speech. And on 8th August 1942 in Bombay, the All India Congress endorsed the resolution. So basically everywhere that called for a non-violent mass struggle on the widest possible scale throughout the country. Everywhere, the cases, the situation of non-violence, it was on the rise. Okay, even when the civil disobedience movement, it was ebbed in its workings, right? Still the people did not lose hope. Still they were adamant on their right, on the fulfill of their rights. Okay, for the completion of the rights, for the fruition of their rights, and they were adamant of their stance. They were adamant on their stance of non-violence. All right. So with the Quit India movement, when Gandhiji gave his famous speech of do or die, so though he gave that ultimatum to the Britishers that you have to transfer all your powers to the Indian administration now, because you have no choice now. Okay, that was that. This movement was finally, resulted. This movement finally resulted in the independence of India. So the call for Quit India almost brought the state machinery to a standstill in large part of the country as people voluntarily threw themselves into the thick of the movement. So now the surge, the enthusiasm of these people, of the enthusiasm of these people was on the high, was on the surge, especially after the consequences of all these national movements, right, such as the non-cooperation movements, such as the civil disobedience movement. So after all these movements, the enthusiasm of the national people, of the local people, of the local masses, it was on the surge, and people now started to come as volunteers. They started themselves getting involved into all these political movements, and finally on the protest, public displays and public protestations. So people observed hartals and demonstrations. People observed processions where they sung national songs, where they shouted national slogans. Okay, and finally, this it was the Quit India movement that culminated into the mass movement. So that effort of bringing each and every citizen of India into one whole, irrespective of their social division, irrespective of their religious division, that was finally possible in Quit India movement. That was a mass movement where thousands of ordinary people, they gathered together, irrespective of whatever background they had. They came together, and they came together in protest of the British government. All right, it saw the active participation of leaders, namely these leaders. You have to remember the names: Jayaprakash Narayan, Aruna Asaf Ali, Ram Manohar Loya, and women leaders as well, like Mantangani Hazra in Bengal, Kanaklata Barua in Assam, and Rama Devi in Odisha. The British responded with much force, yet it took more than a year to suppress the movement. So, of course, the British resorted to that same violent, brutal repression, but the people, they were undeterred from their motive. They wanted the Britishers to go away. They were very adamant. All right, and finally it took many more years for the independence to happen in 1947, but it finally came to fruition. Now we'll be discussing three chapters, and with the discussion of these chapters, I'm sorry, now we'll be discussing three questions, and with the discussion of these three questions, this chapter will finally come to an end. So, what have we learned about the Jallianwala Bagh massacre? So, we know that the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, it happened on 13th April 1919, and it was a special occasion on that day, right? It was the occasion of Baisakhi, which is also known as the spring harvest festival, right? And what were people doing there? They had come out in protest. What kind of protest? These protests were peaceful, they were non-violent, okay, following the Satyagraha principles of Gandhiji, following the Satyagraha principles of Gandhiji. All right. And on 10th April 1919, General Dyer had already given that permission, given that order of a martial law, all right, where people were not allowed to hold any protestations. Okay, so when he did that, and on 13th April 1919, when people six and not just six, but majorly six, but other peoples as well, they were in the protest. And why were they protesting? They were protesting the arrest of two important people. They were protesting against the arrest of Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu, um, Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu, and Dr. Satya Pal. Okay, so they were protesting against the imprisonment of Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal. And what did General Dyer do? He gave the permission to open fire that led to the killing of approximately 289 innocent people. All right. So these people, they were unarmed. They were they were basically participating in a peaceful, non-violent protest following the Satyagraha principle of Gandhiji, and they were protesting against the arrest of Dr. Saifuddin Kishru and Dr. Satyapal. And when General Dyer opened arms, he basically permitted people, his soldiers, to open arms. A massacre happened, killing of innocent people happened, and approximately 289 innocent people, they were massacred, and many others were injured. All right. Why did Gandhi decide to withdraw the non-cooperation movement? The non-cooperation movement saw the boycott of British goods, right? Boycott of British goods, not just British goods, but British, you can say, titles, British positions of jobs. Okay, so everything that the Britishers owned basically that were being boycotted, that were being neglected. Okay, and Indian goods they were being adopted. Indian Indian everything that was made in India, or everything that was being processed in India, that were being adopted. So Gandhiji decided to withdraw the non-cooperation movement because this non-violent movement, it actually took a violent stance in the Chauri Chaura incident. In the Chauri Chaura incident, this Chauri Chaura is a place in Gorakhpur, UP. This incident happened in 1922, Gorakhpur. Okay, and what happened in this incident? In this incident, people were gathered in peaceful protest, and police came. A conflict happened between the people and the police, and that conflict it took a nature of violence. Okay, so the non-violent peaceful protest took a turn of violence. All right, and that upsetted Gandhiji because this had not happened for the first time, but this was a major incident that finally forced Gandhiji to withdraw the non-cooperation movement, because the aim of this movement was non-violent boycott of British jobs, titles, goods, but rather than being a part of peaceful protest, people were being innocently victimized, people were being targeted, and they were being killed and exploited. Okay, what is meant by the idea of Satyagraha? So Satyagraha is the insistence or the persistence of truth. All right. So Gandhiji had this policy of adopting truth and non-violence as his two major power of resisting against the Britishers. And since it did not involve any armed protest or any armed rally or any armed, you can say, attack against the Britishers, so we often call this as our passive resistance. All right, passive resistance. Okay, and what again Gandhiji used? He used his soul power. And what do we mean by soul power? We mean the power of love, the power of devotion, okay, the power of patience and non-violence, and all these things are in a loop again. So the idea of Satyagraha was the basically it was the principle that was adopted by Gandhiji, principle by Gandhiji, all right, and it had some tenets. The two most important tenets: insistence of truth and non-violence. Passive resistance, because there is no active armed struggle involved, and the power of soul power as opposed to the power of arms. Okay, because the soul power inculcates love, devotion, as opposed to the armed forces that the Britishers were using. So with this, we have come to the conclusion of this chapter, nationalism in India, where we have discussed important movements, non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement, and we have seen how each division in our Indian society were reacting in the heat of all these movements, and finally we have seen the culmination of these movements that resulted in the Quit India movement. Okay. In this part of the chapter, we'll be having a quick revision where we recapitulating important points that we have learned in this chapter about the important movements and about the culmination of these movements that finally led India towards its independence. So, rise of nationalism in India started with the repressive policies of the British and economic hardships that followed after the world wars. Remember the implication of the World War One, where the prices of the goods, they were taxes were being levied. Okay, that led to famine, that led to hunger riots. All right. Then the return of Gandhiji from South Africa, it added impetus, it added fuel to the national movement, because he came up with his ideas, his principles of the Satyagraha. All right, and then he gave rise to the non-cooperation movement that was based on Gandhian tenets that we have discussed in the previous slide, where we had discussed those questions, and of truth and non-violence. And then this non-cooperation movement gave rise to boycott of all the things that were being owned and ruled by the Britishers. So different areas had different peoples belong to different sections of the society, and these people, they showed or they participated in these movements via their own respective capacities. So people from towns, hills, countryside, they all had dramatic economic implications. And all of them had their own agenda to be participated in the movement. Civil disobedience was a mass movement, and it different groups of the society had their own role to play. It was initiated by the famous Dandi March of Gandhiji. Okay, and the civil disobedience movement saw to it that all the people of the India, they are coming as one mass. But unfortunately, there were a lot of limitations in this movement, because the our society of India is divided into different factions, is divided into a different social class. All right, and different social class means having all those people have different um, all those people have different economic and social backgrounds. All right, so everybody, be it from the rich peasantry, be it from the poor peasantry, be it people from the industrial class, or be it people from belonging from the minority communities such as the Muslims or such as the untouchables, they had their own rights, they had their own dignity that they wanted to be represented in the Indian government along with the independence of India. So this movement had a mixed response, therefore, and the issues of Dalits and Muslims, it cropped up. Okay, women participated enthusiastically, especially women belonging to the upper caste in the richer areas, and other people. Okay, symbols of patriotism arose in forms of song, music, paintings, flags, and folk tales. All right, so literature, songs, novels, basically a solidification or an integration of a culture that is Indian as opposed to the British culture. And finally, all of this all of this culminated into the Quit India movement that gave a major blow to the British roots in India, because it was the Quit India movement that did away with all the limitations of the civil disobedience movement. So it was under this movement that people belonging to all the different factions in the society, they came together into one mass movement. Okay, all of them, even the local public, they gathered voluntarily, and they gathered with enthusiasm, and they gathered even though the Britishers wanted to repress them, and they did that, but they still gathered in large numbers. And finally, we gave a major blow to the British, and it was on 15th August 1947 that India gained independence. So with this, we come to the conclusion of this chapter. I'll be discussing with you other interesting chapters with you. So stay tuned to Study Room, and thank you so much for joining me here. Study well and take care.